So that was really what got us to this place. And what you hear me say now often is that we're making interactive television. We're not, it's a different kind of experience, but it is live and it is community and it is connecting human beings.
Welcome to Virtually Live by Kaltura. In this podcast, we'll try to sum up all the latest and greatest in marketing, and specifically in event marketing. To help us do that, we've invited prominent marketing and business leaders to share their most important lessons and give their best predictions for the coming years. In today's episode, Michal, Kaltura's co-founder, president, and CMO, talks how virtual events require their own marketing category with DocuSign CMO, Giglio, Nicola Kastner, VP Global Head of Event Strategy at SAP, and Bejan, VP Global Events, Production Studios, and Marketing Community at Microsoft. They'll also be discussing how events now fit into the marketing funnel, plus a whole lot more in just a minute.
Welcome to Kaltura's Virtually Live. My name is Michal, Tsur. I'm Kaltura's co-founder, president, and chief marketing officer, and I'm joining you virtually live from a rooftop in Jerusalem. Take a look at the beautiful view here behind me. So let's meet our panelists. With me here is Giglio, DocuSign's chief marketing officer.
Hi, I'm happy to be joining you virtually live from Moraga, California.
And Nicola Kastner, Vice President and Global Head of Event Strategy at SAP.
Hi, everyone. I'm happy to be joining you virtually live from Toronto, Ontario, Canada.
And Bejan, Corporate Vice President, Global Events, Production Studios, and Marketing Community at Microsoft.
And I'm joining you virtually live from Seattle, Washington.
Welcome to you all, and thank you so much for joining us today. Could you perhaps share a little more about yourselves?
Sure. This is Rob. I would like to, I'll share professionally that I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at DocuSign, which has accountability for driving demand through each step through the customer journey. We have a global team headquartered in the US, in the UK, in Brazil, and in APAC in Sydney, Australia.
I'm Nicola Kastner from SAP, and so I am a member of the Global Events Organization, and I lead our strategy function and third-party event portfolio. And our team is global. We're all over the world, and we're responsible for our largest and most important strategic events at SAP.
And I'm Bejan, and I am Corporate Vice President and responsible for global events at Microsoft, also our production studio and recording facilities here at the campus, as well as marketing, learning, and all of our communities, both professional and ERG, at the marketing community at Microsoft.
So Rob, let's get right in there. How has the shift to virtual and virtual events specifically changed marketing, and how is customer experience different today than it was 2 years ago?
As marketers, the ability to get face-to-face with customers in large settings or small has changed dramatically. What hasn't changed, however, is the use of data and technology to create compelling marketing opportunities, whether it's the continued use of email or the continued use of search and display, or in our case, the aggressive use of virtual events like the one we're having today.
So if events have gone virtual and also sales has gone virtual, if you look more holistically at all of the customer touch points and experiences, I mean, how is this changing marketing?
I like to think that it is forcing us to be better at the things that we already should have been particularly good at. And what I mean by that is it is creating opportunities to have a lot of data. I mean, we have the ability to understand a lot of customer touch points and measure them and use that data to decide what's working, what's not working from a marketing perspective. And so when you think about the optimization process, we have a lot more data. And while we should have always been using it, when you're virtual, there's really not an excuse to have a point of information or a point of data about every marketing activity that you have in your portfolio.
Let's talk a bit about that from a practical standpoint. Physical and in-person and virtual are so different mediums. How does it affect your event strategy at SAP? And do you think it's a change for the better or worse?
Well, I think it is a change for the better. We had a tendency to use events at SAP is the answer to solve most of our business problems. And, quite frankly, they're not the answer to everything. And so it's made us really think holistically about the customer journey and what is the right touch point that we should use along the customer journey. And so as we come out of the pandemic, we still stay in the pandemic, but we're allowed to go back to in-person events, there's a place for virtual, there is a place for digital or for hybrid, and there is a place for physical only. And for us, it's really important. We've spent a lot of time thinking about who are the right people at the right time to get to in person? How do we target them? How do we make the experience relevant for them? Because the reality is nobody is going to take the time to travel to be with us at a physical event if they can get the same content or the same experience online. So how do we manage between the two and blend them seamlessly?
And maybe related to that, so with all of these changes, how has this impacted your teams and more broadly, the different marketing roles and structure of your team?
Well, I think fundamentally it's changed how we work, not just within my team, but as the whole marketing department, because the lines are blurred. Now, they were very clear about when the event started, when the event stopped, and when it was passed off to other areas of the business. Now those lines aren't so clear. And so the integration, it's forced the right conversations about integration and that holistic view of the customer journey. So I think it's changed it for the better. I do think, though, fundamentally as event marketers, we chose this industry because we love events. And what I'm seeing is there's struggle within the teams to embrace the digital medium and the value of the digital medium remaining because we love events. If we wanted to be digital marketers, we would have been digital marketers. So, I think as leaders, as we start to evolve our teams, in the next stage of the pandemic, I don't want to say post-pandemic, we need to hire different skill sets than we traditionally would have in the past.
So Bob, you mentioned to me earlier when we spoke that virtual events are in fact perhaps should not be treated as events, but maybe as a new marketing category. And I love that. I mean, could you elaborate a little more about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's the thing is I think it's not that they're not events, because I do believe that what we're building are these things that are taking place in time, in a place, and creating a sense of place and people together. The thing that is the biggest striking thing and the biggest epiphany, I think, for the team at Microsoft was this realization that you can't just translate what we did in the before time in an event and try and recreate it inside the digital world. Not only can't do it, but in some ways, dramatically, as storytellers, all of us, you never want to put people, you don't want to put your audience in a position where you're reminding them of the thing that they don't have. And so this notion of you can't translate, you have to completely reinvent, put us on this path that I think started to occur to us that we were making something new, even though we had a lot of the same goals, creating community, a sense of togetherness of a group of people in a time, in a place, in the digital world. So in every way, an event, but doing it in the medium that we're working in now, which is very different. It has a very different time signature, has very different rhythm and tempo. It does some things better than live events or in-person situations, but does some things not as well. So you kind of have to accentuate the positive, if you will. And so that was really what got us to this place. And what you hear me say now often is that we're making interactive television. We're not, it's a different kind of experience, but it is live and it is community and it is connecting human beings.
So actually, let's dive deeper into that. So what do you feel is better and what do you feel is worse?
Well, I mean, those four things I listed before, I mean, absolutely are the things that we think are better. One, the scale is outrageously better. We are going to do Ignite in 10 days. Last year, we were, 2 years ago, the last time we did it in the before time in Orlando, we had 24,000 people. Last year in the fall, we flipped out, realizing that we had 125,000 people, which was amazing. As of this morning, with 10 days to go, we're at 227,000 registered.
Wow.
So, you just go, okay, that's a whole nother, it's a different thing. And so, and then the efficacy, one of the biggest things that for us is, can you get people certified in technologies? And this is one of the big reasons why we did events. We'd bring you to Orlando for a week and get you certified on a technology. But that was 5,000, 6,000 people at a time was the definition of success in 2019. Last year at Ignite, we did 89,000 certifications. At Build last spring in May, we did 160,000. So, and our hope is we're going to do in excess of 300,000 at this show. And so you kind of go like, it's just a whole nother, it's just a completely different playing field.
So I think, and I know what your answer is going to be for my next question, but still, just in case, hopefully the world will get rid of COVID very soon. What do you believe will happen to events? Will it be the end of virtual events, or will they sustain?
From our perspective, we really believe that what we are on to now is this idea of delivering our events, all of our events, as a digital core first, because it allows us to get all of our executives to a place. It allows us to get all of our engineers to a place without taking them out of their engineering departments. So we'll deliver that digital core to the globe and then activate in live in-person events locally and regionally through all of our international sales offices. And so, there really will be this ability to distribute the digital core of something like Microsoft Ignite and then activate it live all over the globe in multiple locations. And so to us, that's really the future of events and the way we're moving forward, at least for the next 2 years. That's our plan.
Yeah, well, I agree with Bob's hypothesis, or at least approach. I think the virtual event is absolutely here to stay. I think most of us did virtual events in the past, although we might not have called them virtual events. We might have called them a webinar or some version of content. And I think we're finding that the event and the webinar and the content creation, whether it's video or it's training or it's even somewhat static, that's just a very powerful, very scalable element in the marketing mix. It's incredibly measurable, as I touched on to begin with, and so absolutely we will continue to leverage virtual events. They're really great, and I think the way we're trying to reimagine it is, let's get a bunch of people together and let's spend time together doing things to interact, so that we're not just sitting shoulder to shoulder staring in the same direction. Let's create opportunities to engage with each other, and then the content can be watched and taken in a lot of different ways. It could be taken in at home, or it could be on the road. So, to answer your question, I liked what Bob had to say, and just to expand on it, we're going to rethink the physical events too.
And Nicola, as you're responding, by the way, you mentioned also a very interesting distinction and classification that you're kind of introducing. So it would be great to hear that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So I agree with both, but I slightly disagree. I think virtual events are here to stay because, to Bob's point, the reach is phenomenal, right? But when if you're designing an event for reach versus designing an event for an intimate discussion with a customer to accelerate pipeline, they're completely different objectives and different tactics that you put in place. So if virtual stays when you need numbers, when you need eyeballs, when you have big announcements, for sure, but the face-to-face interactions of our sales teams with our customers can never be replaced in any other mechanism. I don't think that. So that's one distinction. The other distinction is, I'm not actually a fan of virtual events with multiple tracks, multiple hours, and at all, quite frankly. I think as marketers, we have overdone it in virtual events because we could. And just because we could, we shouldn't. I think, as you think about a physical event, it's a bundle of activities that you put together to maximize time, space, while you're holding your attendees hostage, quite frankly, at a location. But the reality is people behave differently digitally. And I used to use this analogy. I'm going to have to find a new one now, but I haven't found it yet. So I'll use my old one. There's a reason that Amazon's not set up like a physical department store. You don't go to Amazon to buy a couch and walk out with a dress or vice versa. That happens at department stores because people browse. Digitally, people are really task orientated. So I don't consider a webinar event an event. I consider it a digital marketing tactic versus an event. And so to me, instead of taking 7 or 8 what could be single standalone webinars where you can target people very, very precisely, we're bundling things together and expecting people to wade through them to find the content that is important to them. So I think there's a balance. Yes, virtual events stay, but I do not think we should be replicating what we had done physically into the digital world, or even though the content delivery might be different, I just don't think we should be bundling activities the same way.
So maybe a question to all of you about budgets. This is a question that comes up very often. With all of these shifts, what is it doing to event budgets? And maybe we'll start with you, Rob.
Yeah, the event budget on our side, just in the kind of current period, has gone up, but it's gone up in ways that you might not otherwise expect. So in the past, most of our budget went to the physical location. Renting rooms, paying for food, that kind of stuff. Now the event budget goes to headcount, preparing the content, producing the videos, third-party tools to allow us to track leads and then remessage to leads. So we're spending more in total. We're doing more events in total. And to Nicola's point, whether you call it an event or a webinar, I think we could, what's in a name, we could debate it. But for us, they live in the same neighborhood. And so when I look at my budget on what I call events, it's up. And I expect it to continue to be up next year.
Bob, how about Microsoft? What has happened to the event budget there?
Well, I mean, our event budget went down a lot, year over year for sure. And I think a lot of that has to do with just the scale at which we operate. And like Rob is saying, food, construction, building out these convention spaces, carpeting, that kind of stuff is outrageously expensive. And so, we found that we could spend a lot more on production value and still net save a significant amount of money in terms of being able to give back money to the company.
That is definitely important. Nicola, how about SAP? What has happened to event budgets there?
I think we are, so definitely our event budget went down when we took away the physical events. But, quite frankly, some events actually have cost us more to produce than they did in the in-person iterations, because we had ticket revenue, we had sponsorship revenue, and so forth. So some that we may have generated a profit on are now costing us a lot of money that they hadn't in the past. Now, granted, a lot more eyeballs, a lot more reach, a lot of the benefits we talked about, but they're costing more. So in order to do digital content well, you have to invest in the content production value and so forth. A talking head in front of a PowerPoint isn't acceptable in digital. So as we move to next year, what we're working through and trying to balance is, what is our mix of physical only, digital only, and hybrid? Because the reality is hybrid, if you're doing 2 events for 2 different audiences for 2 different objectives, and hybrid means something different to everybody, but it's some iteration between physical only or digital only, that's expensive and that's resource intensive. So if we're going to do both well, we have to invest in doing that, or we have to determine, do we lead with physical and do a digital extension, or do we do it the other way around? But we have to determine what is our primary objective, because I just do not believe we have those resources, whether it's financial or headcount, to do both well at the same time.
So you're not a big fan of hybrid?
No, that's not the case. That's not the case. But I don't think we should be trying to do, they're built for different objectives. And when you try and merge 2 things together that are different objectives, that becomes very difficult to do.
Yeah, definitely. So actually, I want to dig a little more into the topic of hybrid after Nicola's previous response. And perhaps Bob and Rob, if you could share a little more about your perspective on hybrid and how you're going about it.
Well, I mean, for us, it's a little bit what I was talking about earlier, this idea of continuing to build on this notion of the digital core and building that out and delivering it, and then using local and regional in-person activation to pick up on the things that, kind of Nicola was talking about, that stuff that cannot be replaced. A sales team working with their account, the meetings that can happen there, the community built around industries and that kind of thing. But what we do think is cool, and this idea of being able to deliver this kind of the full value of the Microsoft offering, our executives, our demoers, our engineers, deliver that digitally, and then create interactive opportunities for those in-person executions to interact with that digital core and the digital space and all the people that are in that meeting or the event digitally. But then once that part of it is over, to then revert back and amplify the things that are unique and singular in the in-person world.
Rob, anything you'd like to add on the topic of hybrid?
The way Bob described it is exactly how we think about it. He did a great definition. Maybe the only, it's not different than his point of view, but it's maybe a different lens onto it, which is that we think of the digital core. We're not using that word, but as of next week we will be. Thanks, Bob. The digital core that's our scale. So we think about that as our scale, and we think about the in-person events as our bespoke. And so really high touch, very considered. The content doesn't have to be as polished and finished leading into that event because you want to leave room for discussion. Whereas the digital core is scale. The content has to be absolutely dialed in, the production value very, very high, and your ability to reuse that content again and again allows you to get a lot of value out of it. So it's like they both have really high ROI, but they get there in very different ways.
We talked before a bit about marketing teams and roles. What do you think about marketing skills? And also, if you could share a bit about any new titles that have sprung up on your teams?
It feels like we have new titles every couple of months, but I don't think we have. I don't think we've really cemented any particular new title. But when I think about the roles, and maybe really the skill sets that we're hiring for, as opposed to the roles, maybe the roles sound similar, but the skill sets. We require skill sets that look a lot more like what Bob was talking about in the prep for this session. Bob was mentioning that it's very production-like, and I think big physical events always had a major production component to them. But the kind of production you were doing might have been making sure you had the right stage dressings and making sure your voiceover was going to come in at the right time and the walk-on music was going to be dialed in. The skills that we require now are these very finessed, almost like video production skills. You've got to be able to route content and manage assets, do localization and language translation, all while you're creating this event. And that's a different set of skills for the team that we have. They're rising to the occasion, so it's been exciting to watch people pick up new skills, but that's very different. And then maybe the last one is, perhaps in the past, event marketers weren't as required to be as ROI oriented. They certainly were cost oriented, absolutely, some of the best budgeters that I've ever worked with as a marketer. But they might not have always thought about what is the translation to revenue? How do these leads flow through the system? Are these good leads? Do these leads score higher than other leads? And I think our event marketing team at DocuSign has really shifted to a place where they both understand how to manage the budgets, but they're also thinking very carefully about who do we invite, how do we engage them, and then what does that mean from either a new product lead or an upsell in an existing customer. These skills are new and different, and I've been happy to see them rise to the occasion. It's been great.
So maybe related to that slightly, we've chatted a bit, Rob, about data and managing very large amounts of data created by these virtual events, but but also the opportunity of leveraging real-time data for real-time touch points and communications with attendees, or maybe even potential attendees at the event. I mean, could you talk a bit how we can make it work to our advantage?
I wish that we at DocuSign were doing more of the real-time engagement in a virtual setting. We mostly, I'm a little bit embarrassed to say, we mostly are pushing. We're pushing content. I don't think the interactivity is at the level that I would want it to be. Right now, we use the basic tactics, like we'll use a chat pod, and there's the normal Q&A, and so the audience is able to engage with presenters at some level, but I don't think it's nearly as engaging as it could be. And I've heard ideas from Nicola and Bob as we were prepping for this session that I think where they're going is probably where we end up, because that's the way to keep these events really stimulating if they happen to be virtual and not physical in person.
So it would be actually great, because data is a very important topic at all of these virtual events. I mean, it'd be great, if both Nicola and Bob, you could also talk about it a little. How are you actually leveraging the data? How are you connecting it to your systems? And maybe also anything about real-time use of this data, because making it actionable during the events.
So when you think about pre-pandemic events, they were often random moments in time, random moments of content delivery, sometimes random messages that are not connected to every other marketing tactic or campaign. And the amount of data that we collected at our events was a treasure trove of data. We could tell buying signals, because if a customer was attending sessions and demos on a product that they didn't own, that's a pretty clear buying signal. But because they were so isolated, we didn't ever really utilize that data in the way that we could. Digital, because it's connected through now, I talked about before, the silos between marketing have broken down. The digital buying signals that we're able to track are really phenomenal. And so those are now integrated into the entire data stack and across the customer journey. So we're able to monitor each of those touch points, which is so important because, we talked about ROI and attribution and so forth. We used to track events ROI on a couple things. On how many people we had, that was our measure of success. I actually don't think it should be our measure of success going forward. It's, did we get the right people and the right outcomes? But then we would say, well, somebody made a buying decision within X days past event, so the event is going to take credit for that. That's like saying you decided to marry your spouse within 30 days of a dinner. That just doesn't happen this way. So the ability to connect the data and really look at the multi-touches and attribute accordingly has been a really great outcome.
Bob, anything you can add on data?
Hardly, but I mean, but I think here's what I would say. As an industry, the potency of human connection, I think, has been the single greatest enabler of intellectual laziness in our industry historically before the pandemic. And I think, it allowed anybody kind of working in the event space to go, well, nothing replaces human to human connection. And everybody goes, oh yeah, that's right. And so we got away with a lot, to be frank, I think. And we didn't really have to be as rigorous as probably any of our other marketing engines. Certainly that's true at Microsoft. But I think Nicola nails it, because I think the pandemic and the wiring harness of the internet and the infinite measurability because of the advertising business that has, matured over the last 27 years has changed everything for us. And what's cool about it is it has become a direct enabler of us not only to optimize and continue to improve at a much more rapid rate from a production, creativity, storytelling perspective, but it also has allowed us to kind of, rehydrate programs or get investment from the company in programs, because we can much more clearly show kind of the value that we're bringing to the company in a way that we just weren't doing before.
Perhaps share, any interesting tip for marketers that are tuning in, and I think it would be great to hear from each of you. What is your tip of the year, or the tip for 2022 for marketers that are tuning in today?
I'll start. I mean, I would say it's just kind of a build on the tip that I've been kind of giving everybody for the last year and a half, which is that you can't imitate. You have to reinvent. You can't just translate what you were doing. And I think, whenever we encounter, Nicola and I are kind of on the speaking circuit, Rob as well, but you encounter people and so overwhelming. There's so much energy of like, when are we going to get back to the old thing? When are we going to get back to live events? And what's this going to be? And it's the tip is like, don't go back. It's just like the forward look is so much more compelling. And to me, that's the thing for 22, 23. It's, how far can we go now that this pandemic that none of us would have ever wished on humankind at all, but it has accelerated so much, kind of evolution in our digital transformation. How far can we get on that momentum?
So perhaps the tip that I would share is that it's easy as we spend a lot of time talking about the virtues of virtual to start to lose track of customers as people. And I think what I would give as a tip, although I don't know that it's more of a reminder than a tip, because this isn't anything magical or secret, but the thing that I would emphasize is it remains all about the customer. And if we can think about our customers, we're talking about really big brands in Microsoft and SAP, and maybe some of the others that are joining this session. Like, if we work at places that have large customer bases, it's super easy to forget about the fact that individual customers are just people. And if we could get all the way down to the person level and think about what matters to them, where are they in the customer journey, and then create marketing that works at the individual level, it's a lot easier to scale it up than to be working at some big macro segment level or global level and try to fake your way into something that's individualized. If you start individualized, it's going to be better. So maybe my reminder is it's about the customer, and you can scale that up, but you have to start there.
Yeah, and my tip, I would say, I echo what both Bob and Rob have said. But in addition to that, I would say as you start to think about bringing your physical events back, think differently. Think about really the why and the who and what you're trying to achieve, and think, versus the number of people. And the experience cannot come back the same way. We are all incredibly savvy consumers in our own lives, but we accept these broken processes at events, right? It's not convenient. And so I think the expectation, if someone is going to give their time to spend with you, the expectation of what they will receive is going to be incredibly different. So we need to think about, how do we create a world-class, and all of our events were world-class in the past, but that experience has to change. It can't be what it was pandemic.
So we're getting quite a few questions from the audience, and perhaps let's do a quick round on each of them. And let's start with you, Rob. I mean, how many virtual events have you done in the past year?
Oh my gosh. Well, we categorize even small attendance webinars as an event. So just to categorize, let me be clear on that. We are averaging, I'd say we probably did 150.
How about you, Bob?
About 7,500.
7,500. Okay. And Nicola?
So our team, not too many, because we focused on the big marquee experiences. But as I think about SAP, I would say too many to count.
And back to you, Rob. What was your biggest marketing pain, and maybe what did you enjoy most in this new normal in 2021?
Knowing what we were willing to commit to from a contract standpoint, not knowing whether we were going physical or we were going to stay virtual, and wanting to commit to physical contracts. That was a challenge for the team. Probably for me personally, it was less of a challenge, but certainly our events marketing team, trying to decide what to commit to and what to hold back on, was really challenging, not knowing what the future was going to look like. That was probably the single biggest. Maybe the surprise glimmer of hope that I saw from that was our team has become incredibly resilient. I think they're really flexible in ways they weren't before, and that's been exciting. And I think the other thing is our relationship with the sales organization has improved dramatically through this flexing on how are these events going to work? Are these working for you? Are they working for us? And so there's a lot more collaboration around what do we want to do together in these events? Because we mutually own, back to the point about the customer, we mutually own the customer demand opportunity.
Nicola, what is your biggest pain this year, and what did you like the most?
Our first Sapphire Now in 2020, our first digital Sapphire Now failed. Our platform didn't launch. 127,000 registrations and the platform didn't launch on our brand new CEO's keynote. Now, fortunately, we had planned to stream to social channels, and that actually became our core, our only way of communicating with our audiences, both for the keynote as well as the following content, which was extensive, multi tracks, multi hours for the first day. So yeah, that was pretty painful, if I do say so.
How about you, Bob?
I think for us, for me personally, the most painful thing was, we ran the studio all the way through the pandemic, with 80, 100 people in that building at a time, 3, 4, 5 days a week. And, I'm happy to say, sitting here now, knock wood, we still have not had a case of COVID come out of that building. But it was it was nerve-wracking and continues to be. It's a lot of worry, extra energy expended. I think the most spectacular thing, though, was having the company support us when we recommended very early on at the end of February of 2020 to cancel all of our live events for the next 18 months and just focus on doing digital events, because the liberation of that empowerment of to stop worrying about what are we going to do, how are we going to do, and just focus on how good can we get at making digital and virtual events. That was an incredible opportunity given to us, in that you don't get very often in the corporate creative world, to be able to kind of really focus and discover and experiment in a way that was, truly, really very rewarding to watch people kind of grow creatively that way.
Do you have any surprising data point that you can share from this past year?
What surprised us from a data standpoint was that customers and prospects alike would engage in virtual events for very long periods of time. If you would have asked me or my leadership team heading into this year and putting on virtual events, I think we were all very worried that you'd have a very short attention span. And instead, I think through the combination of creating good content, but also the interest and willingness on the part of our prospects and customers to immerse in the experience, we had much longer view times than I ever would have imagined. So that's probably the single most surprising statistic as it relates to events in this last year.
How about you, Nicola, at SAP? What was the most surprising data point as it relates to events?
So completely the opposite from Rob. I don't know what you're doing right, but I think I'm going to start watching your events, because we certainly haven't had those long dwell times. So for me, I think the biggest surprise was, reach obviously was huge, but we reached new audiences than traditionally would have come to our physical events. Much more so than our core. A lot of our traditional core customers that would have attended our physical events didn't necessarily come to our digital events. Also, which didn't surprise me, but I think it's an important statistic that we talk about as an industry, it's very difficult to engage with senior executive stakeholders in a digital event medium. All of us have put events on our calendars, and unfortunately, something else comes up. We haven't blocked her out of office because of a virtual event, and people just don't go to the event. So, certainly we're seeing reach in new audiences, but we're also seeing that reach at a lower level than necessarily some of the people we would like to be talking to.
So Bob, to you, what was your most surprising data points?
I think the big data surprises for us were the following, and I think maybe, Nicola, we may not be so far off, because I'm going to say this to Rob and see if it's true. It, by definition of web viewing, like web advertising and that kind of thing, there's no question that the view times are much, much longer. But I think for us, the big learning was, and I'll be very specific about it, you cannot do the kind of speeches that you could do in the live world, where our CEO would do an hour and 15-minute keynote kind of thing to kick off Ignite. The reality is, in the digital world, 23 minutes, the length of a half an hour episode, is as long as anybody will watch anything. And it doesn't matter who you are, and it doesn't matter what you're talking about. About 23 minutes, and you're not changing it up after that if it's not moving along. That's the other one. The last data point that I'll give you on that one very specifically is, if you get people engaged in the first 3 minutes, they'll give you 70 minutes. If you don't get them in the first 3 minutes, they're gone. And that's been a very interesting and very universal across all of our audiences data point of the last 18 months.
Yeah, if I could expand on that, I agree with you, Bob. I think when we reshaped our events, we necessarily cut them down. I mean, it wasn't going to be a 2 or 3 day customer event. We knew that ahead of time, so we were editing them down into manageable sizes. But again, even if you would have asked me, I didn't think that we would have the vast majority, like 80% plus of our audience lasting an hour on a webinar, because maybe I was the wrong projection, but I was projecting my own experience and my own data that I'd seen in the past. I thought, yeah, you're lucky to get 25 minutes. But we were getting much longer view times. And I think it actually has a lot to do with the audience. That's certainly part of it. We're being very thoughtful about letting them know what they're going to see and sort of pre-programming them for what they're going to see. That's part one. But part two is we are way more thoughtful about the content creation. Like there's no turnkey to producing an event that's going to get filmed. It's going to be tight. It's going to be very specific. The screenshots are going to be better. If you're going to show a product demo, you're in tight on it. And frankly, if we all think back to the days of physical events, you're up there, or we do got the Wi-Fi connection dialed in, and can everyone in the audience actually see the product demo in the same way that you can do when you film with like 4 cameras on a virtual event. So, I think some of it is just the nature of the content is just way better.
Do you think a webinar is a virtual event, or more so digital content, and why?
I don't see it as an event because an event is a moment in time. Yes, event content can be available on demand. I see it as a digital tactic. And one quick comment that I've been meaning to mention is we also have to, when we think about our content and where it lives post-event or webinar or wherever it is, we need to make that accessible always to people. They shouldn't have to wait to our events to find a roadmap session or whatever it might be. We need to really think about how do we allow our audiences to engage digitally with all of our content outside of whatever delivery mechanism it is.
Yeah, and I would say I absolutely think there is such a thing as digital events, and I think we're starting to define what the boundaries of them are, and they are a place and time. They are a group of people together in a place and time, and they are distinguished from web pages with links to video content, and I think all those things can exist, but I absolutely believe in the concept and the ability to create a live, connected and humanly connected events in the digital world.
So we're almost out of time. I'd like to very quickly ask each of you to share a quick lesson learned in the past year before we actually wrap up this interesting leadership panel.
Well, my personal lesson learned through marketing during this time was be flexible. I guess that relates to like the way I think about things. Like so much has changed in my perspective on marketing. I thought I sort of understood the basic component parts, but so much has changed in the way we can market and the way customers respond, and whether we're working together in person or we're working together remote, whether we're doing events in person or doing events remote. I think so many of the things that I believe to be true about all those things, I have learned new lessons. So be flexible. That's my big finding.
Definitely agree with Rob. That would have been exactly what I said. And think differently. Just think differently and be okay with failing and or trying new things. And at the end of the day, remember, we're not saving lives. Like, yeah, it's okay to experiment and fail or succeed. So just keep a perspective.
Change is hard. It takes a lot of energy, and modern leadership is repeating yourself with a good attitude.
Rob, Nicola, Bob, thank you so much for joining us today at Kaltura Virtually Live Leadership Panel. And thanks everybody for tuning in. I think we can all agree that virtual events will continue evolving in new and exciting ways and generate new types of actionable data. And it will create many new ways for us to communicate and create experiences for our customers. I hope you all stay with us for the sessions later today. There's a lot of exciting content. So thanks everybody for joining us today.
Thank you to our guests, Rob Giglio, Nicola Kastner, and Bob Bejan. Join Noah Zmora, Kaltura's VP brand, next week when she gets writer, producer, and actor Leo Raz to share his tips and tricks to delivering a great story and message to your audience. Plus more showbiz-inspired secrets marketers can take advantage of. Thanks for joining.